Well, hello and welcome to The Point. My name's David Flavel and I'm the Minister, and I'm delighted to welcome you whether you're sitting at The Point in Hexham Priory School at 9 o'clock or 4 o'clock on a Sunday, or whether you're watching at home in the big wide world of the internet. This week we're continuing our series on Galatians, a letter written by St Paul, one of the first Christians, to Christians in Galatia, which is modern day Turkey. This week's talk is going to be slightly shorter than normal because this week we're sharing bread and wine. And if you want to share bread and wine with us today, then you're all very welcome. And in fact, that's the theme of what we're talking about today as we continue our letter, and we're looking at chapter 2. Last week we saw how Paul went to Jerusalem and met with the leaders, the so-called leaders, and stood his ground and told them what needed to happen. He continues this week in Galatians 2:11, when Cephas, you remember that's another name for Peter, when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. For before certain men came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. So Peter would eat with everybody. And you have to remember that in those days, who you ate with really mattered, because for Jews, you could only eat kosher food with other Jewish people. But when those certain men from James arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. And we had that last week, the circumcision group. It's the Jews, Jewish Christians who want to keep the Jewish law. So Peter is eating with people, he's sharing, but then when the Jews come along, he suddenly decides that he needs to turn back. The other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy, so that by their hypocrisy, even Barnabas was led astray. And Barnabas, of course, is Paul's very good friend, who's been with him in so many different things. So Paul doesn't blame Barnabas, he blames Peter for leading Barnabas away. But what is it about eating with other people? What is it with having to choose that? Why did Peter start off one way, but then be persuaded to go back to his old ways? We might say that Peter was trying to run with the hare and hunt with the hounds at the same time, or maybe have his cake and eat it. When he was with the Jewish people, he wanted to eat like that, but when he was with the Gentiles, he was very happy to share with them until both groups came together, and then he was stuck and he went back on his ways, which infuriated Paul. But why did he do that? And do we do the same? Do we find ourselves in a position where with one group of people we act in one way, and with another group of people we act in a different way? Which brings me to my question. So today there's just one question, because we're having communion later, and it's a question that can be answered by both Christians and non-Christians, not yet Christians, alike. I hope you can manage it. Are you the same person everywhere you go? And now, obviously, you are the same person, you're the same physical being, but do you behave the same way? Do people see you the same wherever you go? Paul's criticism of Peter was that he acted in one way when nobody else was around, but when people who might disapprove of something came, he changed his behaviour. Do you do that? Are you the same person everywhere you go? Paul himself, in one of his letters, talked about how he tries to be like others in order to help win them. But is there something about being the same person that gives you an integrity? Or is there something about getting on with people and being prepared to adapt, which helps you to get on in life and helps you not to be disagreeable? So sit yourself down. If you're at home, then put the video on pause. If you're at the point, then find yourself a table, get yourself a cup of tea. And if you've got a better question, then please get that in first, because we're always wanting to hear what you have to say. So if you've got a better question, then put that. Otherwise, we'll see you in a little bit. Well, we're about to share in bread and wine, but before we do that, I'm just going to give you my takeaway for this week. This week I'm going to suggest that we should live a life of integrity. We should be the same with whomever we meet. As a Christian, if you're looking for an example of somebody like that, then I would give the example of Jesus, who is the same loving, gracious and challenging person with his disciples, with the people around, with the religious leaders. He lived a life that was clearly had integrity. As for us, well, we live our lives one way with some people, another way with others. But maybe this week, maybe we can look at how we can live a whole life. But for now, let's share bread and wine, and I'll let the person in charge lead us in the next part of the session.